The level of fragmentation in Spain, polarization, is unseen. I have always had socialist friends, conservative friends, even people from the extreme left, no problem. And you just laughed about it. This is a very open country now. We have reached a point in which the level of fragmentation is so enormous that the government is constantly trying to make everybody else an enemy. It's not asking people to be with them. It's asking to be with them or against them.
Last year, in the general elections in Spain, the centre-right party won the largest share of votes but did not win enough seats to form a government, and they were also unable to form a coalition. The incumbent Socialist Party was invited by the King of Spain to attempt to form a new government. To do this, they struck a deal with the Catalonia separatist parties. This deal has since then put democracy on a standstill in Spain because it would include an amnesty for which the separatists who illegally declared independence in Spain in 2017 would not face any charges. Spanish politics in the last year has been in chaos. In this episode, we will dive into the current political economy of Spain and what this chaos has led to. To do this, I am joined by Daniel Lacalle. He is a professor of global economy at IE University and also chief economist at Tracy's, a private investment bank based in Madrid. So, on to the show. Good morning, Daniel, and thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
So we are sitting here in Madrid, and all of the talk right now in politics in Spain is about the amnesty bill, which will likely pass today or tomorrow, or at least sometime this week. And for audiences who are not in Spain, I think they're missing quite a substantial amount of context on why this bill has essentially brought democracy in general in question here in Spain. And I assume this goes back to at least the most recent incarnation of this problem was in 2017 in August, when Catalonia unilaterally declared independence from Spain following a very faulty, to put it mildly, referendum that they held that time. I want to start there. Why was it justified, or why did Catalonia think they were justified to declare themselves independent from Spain? And how does this, or that kind of independent streak, make its ways forward into the current problem now in 2024 politics in Spain?
Okay, let's start with a little bit of history. The separatist parties in Spain are not forbidden. They are not even having difficulties to disseminate their message. In fact, many of them are in power in their regions and have contributed and been in the national governments, either supporting or with ministerial position. In Spain, there is absolutely no problem if you want to defend a separatist position. There is a constitution in Spain. There is a constitution and there is a law. It's completely different to defend separatism than to unilaterally declare a referendum that has not been approved and without any type of legal or constitutional rights, because it wasn't even a referendum. It was literally just a pantomime trying to make some kind of a vote that was almost predetermined by a very specific group of parties. Secondly, the regional government of Catalonia does not have the power to declare unilaterally independence. It is not an autonomous region with that kind of power. An autonomous region in Spain has a very significant level of power, more than, for example, the Landes in Germany or than many states in the United States. But basically what was happening was a literal coup d'etat. It was a literal coup d'etat in which, by the way, they were even going against the vote, because there's a very important context to be put as well, is that the separatist parties have never been more than 50% of the vote. Most of Catalonian citizens like an autonomous region, like their culture, like to defend their unique characteristics. That is absolutely perfect, but not outside of Spain and certainly outside. It was also not a declaration of independence, because you don't declare yourself independent and at the same time continue to want the same currency, the same European Union, the same legal, and by the way that Spain would continue to pay for the pensions. It makes no sense. That's one of the elements. That created a very significant level of tension, and obviously there were a number of judicial procedures that led to people that had to go to jail for embezzlement. People didn't go to jail because of their ideas. They went to jail because of embezzlement or because of breaking specific laws. Completely different thing. And one of them, not one of them, but a couple of them fled the country, left the country, which they did and continued to defend their position. One of them was Mr. Puigdemont, who was the president of the Generalitat and fled the country. This leads now to an amnesty law that has another important precedent. When Pedro Sánchez, the current leader of the Socialist Party and also the Secretary General of the Socialist Party and leader of the government, found himself in a very weak position in terms of ability to retain a majority in parliament, they had to start to concede to the demands of some of the Catalan nationalists. Those requests started with the reduction of the penalty for embezzlement, for public embezzlement, which in itself is quite surprising considering that this government, and Mr. Sánchez in particular, sells itself as, or prides itself and be against corruption. Reducing the penalty on embezzlement is quite surprising. The other was to eliminate the penalty and the obvious challenges that creates of sedition, which those two weren't enough. So the Socialist Party has always been against an amnesty law. An amnesty law, let's start from the premise of what is an amnesty law. An amnesty law is usually declared when there is a change of a regime, usually when you go from a dictatorship to a democracy, in which you agree that there are a number of people that have been wrongfully declared delinquents because of their political ideas. That is not the case in Spain, in any case. But there's a very important element of an amnesty law to take into account, is that there is no amnesty law in the world in which, in a democracy, there has been any kind of amnesty to citizens that have not declared that they will not repeat those same actions or that they reject the actions that they undertook. That you can provide an amnesty. You could actually provide an amnesty to the Catalan separatists that fled the country if they had publicly declared that they had broken the law, accepted the penalties, and then you can receive an amnesty. This is an ad hoc amnesty law dictated by the person that broke the law in order to amnesty himself from not just the things that they did and he did in 2017, but in the future. It's completely insane. It's so wide open and so dangerous precisely because of that. Because it is literally saying that all of the judicial system, which is independent in Spain, that all of the proceedings have been declared as illegal, as if the state had committed some kind of harm or committed some kind of illegality. I think that the most important fact here is that there has never been an amnesty law ever in any democratic country. I don't think that in any country, but certainly in no developed country, that has been dictated by the person that is going to be benefited by that amnesty law without any kind of repentance and without any kind of change in the political position of that person.
Yeah, it's very surprising, of course, that this has even gone to this stage. And of course, Sanchez's coalition couldn't exist without the agreements that he gave to the separatists in this amnesty bill. But going back a few years, I guess the original reason why Sanchez essentially came to power was he cast a no confidence vote against Rajoy at the time. And how the constitution works in Spain here, for listener context, is the person who cast a vote of no confidence, if it gets supported, he then actually becomes the president of the government. That's how Sanchez became prime minister or president of the government, to use Spain language. And at that time, it was him. He had to get collaboration from other separatist parties, Basque groups included, to vote for his no confidence motion. So I'm wondering, in this political history, is collaborating with separatist groups an outlier in politics, or is this a very normal part of the course?
The Socialist Party and the Conservative Party have collaborated and even reached agreements with separatist parties in the past numerous times, but always within the Constitution and always within the rule of law. The first time that we have seen somebody give in to the demands of separatists and changing the law to keep his position in power has been with Mr. Sanchez, and Mr. Sanchez since 2019. In fact, if you go to press clippings from the past and you read what Mr. Sanchez said in 2016, 17, 18, 19 about all these things, you would be very surprised. You would be actually amazed at how rigorous and how radical and how strong in his defense of the constitutional framework and the rule of law and the law as it is. So his change is a very important one, is a very significant one, because it's the first time that the Socialist Party agrees to a 180-degree change in the legal framework that places the independent judicial system as the evil side. And they've even used the term lawfare, as the judicial system is going against democracy. No, for them, democracy is what they agree after the fact. Because it's important also to remember, for everyone listening, that Mr. Sanchez and the Socialist Party were radically against the amnesty, any type of amnesty law, until they required 7 votes from this particular separatist party in order to continue to be in power. So until the 23rd of July of 2023, the Socialist Party was in complete agreement with the Conservative Party. So it's not that this is a difference of opinions between socialists and conservatives. No, this is a change of view from the Socialist Party that has before and after. Before, they needed 7 votes to remain in power. They were radically against. After they needed those 7 votes, they are radically in favor. By the way, in favor not of an amnesty law, but in favor of the amnesty law that the person that has fled the country demands, which is also outrageous in my view.
So let's talk a bit about Puigdemont in detail. One of the basic presuppositions that people have when they think about the separatist group in Catalonia in particular is that there are likely some kind of communist, socialist combination of people. If that is true, or if that's not true, what the economic, political ideology of these groups, that if they were to separate from Spain, what kind of ideology would they want to instill in Catalonia itself?
I don't think it's a question of ideology. I think that it's a very big mistake that is very typical when I travel abroad to assume that separatism in Spain has a sort of Marxist ideology. Separatism, you have right-wing parties that are separatist in the Basque region and in Catalonia. Puigdemont is undeniably a right-wing conservative, however you want to call it. And more importantly, it's interesting to remind that Pedro Sánchez himself used to call him xenophobic far right before he needed 7 votes to remain in power. Separatism in Spain is not just a question of left or right. It's not a question of what kind of ideological type of regime they would like to implement. Separatism is based, as so many other separatist movements, on a combination of myths and white lies. The first myth is obviously that the Catalonia within Spain is being robbed, is being stolen, that they are rich, that they generate tremendous level of wealth, and that the rest of Spain is stealing from them. And the white lie, no, not white, the absolute lie, is that it was an independent nation and that somehow throughout an imperialistic approach it was absorbed by Spain. Catalonia was never an independent nation. It was a county at best. So I think that it's important to understand that separatism doesn't have a specific ideology, and Puigdemont is certainly a right-wing separatist.
So the point you mentioned in passing, the common sentiment that Spain, national Spain, non-Catalonian Spain is stealing money from Catalonia, what is the actual economic position of Catalonia relative to Spain?
Catalonia is a very rich region within Spain. It's got phenomenal industry and very good businesses and thriving businesses. But Catalonia has been losing relative to other regions quite dramatically since the socialist part of separatism has taken over in terms of power. It's got very high taxes, it's got enormous levels of interventionism, and its position is that of a rich region within a country. So the message or the idea that Catalonia is robbed by the rest of Spain is as ludicrous as when you hear from the north of Italy that the north is being robbed by the south. But it's very tantalizing to repeat that message that all your troubles are created by an external enemy that at the same time is an internal enemy. The Catalonian economy and the Catalonian region is a very open region. Separatism is important in terms of political parties, but people in general are very open. They feel Europeans, they feel Spanish. More than half of the population feel that they're Spanish. And they understand that as a rich region, precisely because it is in Spain and within the European Union. But separatism is always about trying to create new borders. This has nothing to do with secession. The libertarian view of secession is to separate yourself from the state. This is not about separating itself from the state. This is about creating a state within a state. It's more about bureaucratic by multiplying the number of heads of the bureaucratic hydra than anything else.
Okay, so in 2023, as you mentioned, Sanchez Socialist Party, PSOE, marginally lost the election in terms of they didn't have enough votes to form government, but also PP couldn't themselves get enough coalition votes to form government, so essentially Sanchez went this route. Since then, how has the governance been able to essentially play out, given that many of the, let's say, separatist voters wouldn't really have a socialist leaning ideology, as you mentioned? Has that stalled governance in Spain substantially?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so evident that there's been a great deal of legislative initiatives that have been unable to be passed because of the fragmentation of the, if you want to call it coalition, or the agreements to maintain Pedro Sánchez in power. Just in the last couple of months, there's been 4 legislative initiatives that have been blocked precisely because of that. We don't have a viable government as it is right now. The Sanchez government has been unable to pass the budget. So the budget in Spain, we don't have a government shutdown like in the United States or debt ceiling crisis. What we have basically is that the previous budget has to be extended. But the fact that this coalition of parties that includes 2 right-wing parties, Catalonian and Basque separatists, also 2 extreme left separatist parties, Esquerra Republicana and Bildu in the Basque country, plus the communists, Sumar, plus the different small parties that came out of the old Podemos. It's a very strange animal. In fact, it is called the Frankenstein coalition here in Spain because it's built up of all of these different elements that have completely different agendas politically. So governance has certainly been suffering quite significantly, and we have seen quite relevant diplomatic crisis because everybody seems to be talking. People in government, you have the vice president that comes from Sumar, which is the communist sort of coalition, is saying one thing and then having to be shut down or quieted down by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So governance is a disaster.
And yet, there has been many comments from international observers like the IMF, World Bank, and others that have been very positive about Spain, or at least moderately positive about Spain in aggregate. And this has been the last 2 years. So what is the disconnect? What are they missing?
Oh, I don't think that they're missing. I think that they don't pay attention to debt, which is very typical. I remember in 2006, 2007, when many international bodies saw Greece as the economic powerhouse of the European Union. Why? Because GDP is bloated by government spending, government hiring, and debt. And it's very typical of international bodies, and obviously it's logical and it's perfectly legitimate, to be diplomatic. But when an economy is growing 2% and public debt is growing 5%, when between 2019 to 2023 in the Spanish economy, investment is down 5%, consumption is flat, and the only thing that has gone through the roof is government spending, that always comes back to bite. When I intervene in debates or in different media outlets in the United States, there's a tremendous amount of independent views saying, oh my gosh, 2 trillion deficit, 1.5 trillion GDP growth, something is not going well. Yet here, it seems that just because Spain is growing, it looks like everything is fine. But you need to look at the quality of that growth. Furthermore, it's not even growth, it's a bounce. Because people are looking at the last couple of years. Of course, the economy is growing 2% after a monster slump of 20% in 2020. So basically, it's a disingenuous, I would say, optimistic approach to the fact that Spain is growing, because, by the way, considering that Spain has a record level of tourist activity, it should not be growing at 2%, it should be growing at 4%.
One of the things I've been realizing more here, it comes to statements from the government. So obviously recently, Javier Milei of Argentina has been let's call it a mild annoyance, put it mildly, to parties, to say the least, to parties like PSOE and so on. And this recent impasse, or supposed impasse between the current government of Spain and Argentina, is very strange. And people kind of figure, why is this happening? What's your view on this?
Oh, it's very easy. The Spanish government, the socialist government, is creating scapegoats that distract the attention of the population out of the mounting number of corruption cases that the Pedro Sánchez administration is suffering, and the inability to pass laws, the mounting level of debt, all of those things, and the discontent, by the way, the general discontent with living standards, etc. So it's a very typical way of distracting the attention, creating a scapegoat, creating an external enemy. It's interesting because if you think about it, the Spanish government interfered in the Argentine elections, which could have created a diplomatic impasse, because they interfered by taking very direct sides, not just with the Kirchner-Mas coalition, but against Milei, not just in favor, but against Milei. And Milei won the elections.
How did they do that?
Mr. Sanchez presented himself in the middle of the election in Argentina with a video supporting Massa, the candidate of the Peronist movement, and supporting him, not just saying Mr. Massa is great, which could in itself have created a diplomatic impasse, but saying not just negative, but derogatory things about Milei. Ms. Yolanda Díaz, vice president of the Spanish government, also did the same. And since Milei in Argentina won the elections with a much larger level of support than the entire coalition of the Spanish government to start with, since then, ministers, the vice president, the president himself, have continuously used Milei, this foreign evil, that with very aggressive insults. No? So far, it's very interesting that just when corruption cases start to appear, when Other corruption cases that had already appeared start to develop and accelerate. And there are more and more news about all of that. Suddenly, the Spanish government creates a diplomatic impasse. It's very typical, by the way. The Kirchner government in Argentina and the Venezuelan government also do that all the time. They're always trying to create an external enemy to avoid the debate about what the issues internally.
On the same Milei topic, so Milei was here maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago for ostensibly for a business trip, but also at a Vox event. He seems to be very explicitly supportive of Abascal and Vox. Has that surprised you in some way, or is it warranted?
No, I don't think it's warranted. I think it's a personal thing that Abascal was evidently somebody that supported him at the beginning, so there's a personal element there. But there is no real, I would say, overlap in terms of policy. Milei is libertarian. It's a libertarian that sees the state as a problem, that wants to open the economy, that wants to reduce the intervention of the state. Vox is more of a classic European right-wing party that is not libertarian in any shape or form. But I think that there is an ulterior motive. I think that Milei understands that libertarian messages resonate closer to a voter that is currently close to right-wing parties than elsewhere. I think that what he sees is that the message of economic freedom, libertarianism, a Mises, Rothbardian type of view of the economy and the state better with audiences that may be today voters of a conservative right-wing statist type of approach, yet may do actually have a closer allegiance with the messages of libertarianism in terms of the economy, etc.
But isn't, for example, Pepe much more close to that viewpoint, at least in Madrid, close to that viewpoint relative
to libertarianism?
Libertarianism.
No, than Vox?
Yeah, than Vox.
Okay, probably yes. I think that in Spain, libertarianism is not present in any shape or form in institutions or in parties. You have a very long tradition in Spain of parties that, for example, the Conservative Party in Spain has always been closer to the Democratic Party in the United States than to the Republicans. It's always been much more of a sort of European type of social democrat. If you start by that, obviously the government in Madrid and Ms. Ayuso and the PP in Madrid, they're much closer to classic liberal free market viewpoints. But parties in general in Spain are very statist. And that's one of the very typical things is that if you look at conservative parties within the landscape of the European Union, they have been traditionally closer to what the Democratic Party in the United States at least used to be until and including the Obama administration. And I would say that the Biden administration as well. They're closer to that, a social democratic view with a free market economy, within a free market economy. That's the conservative parties. The right-wing parties in Europe are very different, hugely different. Some are very nationalistic and very traditional in terms of viewpoints. Others are more parts of the old conservative party that have moved into a different spectrum. Others are more free market-oriented classic liberals. They're very different. I don't see any resemblance. When I saw that gathering, Vox, the Meloni party, and Le Pen, I don't see any resemblance between those three. They seem so different in so many aspects. And the only reason why they're put together in Europe is because the Conservative Party in the European Union, the European Popular Party, and the European Socialist Party, both are almost indistinguishable in many aspects. They're different in some sort of, but not in many of the aspects that we would consider really ideological differences, no?
Yeah, that is the difficulty. Every time I'm trying to explain the contours of European party ideology, like in Finland or, for example, here in Spain, of course, it's very difficult if you're using American terminology or American lenses or even British terminology and British frame of references. So in the US, there is a very somewhat clear distinction between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, at least in terms of social policy, or the explicit support of social policies or social values. For example, think about gay rights, at least these days, is sometimes a good example. But here in Madrid, at least in Madrid, there doesn't seem to be a very clear distinction in social value reference terms of at least the two major political parties.
There's none.
There's none.
There is none. They're artificially created because the issues of Spain is an incredibly tolerant, beautifully tolerant society in which there are no real issues of gender, of social issues, all these things. I mean, there may be fringe things here and there. I'm not going to say that it's perfect. But this is a very tolerant society. We've had the LGBT community organizing the gay parade since I was a kid, which is something that in other countries was not even fathomable. You don't have real differences in terms of gay rights, gay marriage, LGBT viewpoints, race, gender. There are no real differences. Obviously, in the debate, the left is going to say that the right is against that. And the right is going to say that the left is pretending to defend those things, but they don't. But in reality, society, you go throughout the entire landscape, including those that are considered extreme right, amazingly tolerant. I've lived in the United States, I've lived in the UK. There's no comparison.
I see. On a previous episode where it had on Diego Sanchez, we discussed a lot about how the policy differentiation in Madrid is also a lot more liberalized than other autonomous regions in Spain. But he did mention there's some hope for some other regions who are currently liberalizing. But on a national level in Spain, what should be some of the main short-term priorities or even medium-term priorities of the national government to put Spain back on the trajectory it had before COVID or even perhaps before 2008?
Yes. The Spanish economy needs to let the private sector breathe. There are a number of things that are not usually in the political debate, but one of the striking differences of the Spanish economy relative to others is the very small size of businesses. This is not a small business economy. This is a micro business economy, which is businesses with less than one employee. This is important to understand because a lot of the challenges of productivity of employment come from all of the barriers, not just taxation-wise, but regulatory-wise and democratically, that prevent small businesses from thriving and growing into mid-sized and then large companies. So that's one of the big problems. The other problem, obviously, is a completely obscene level of unemployment. I find it infuriating as a Spaniard that has lived in the United States and the UK to hear the government say that there's a record level of employment. What a stupidity when you have the highest unemployment rate in the world, only surpassed by, Ukraine that's in war. So I'm particularly concerned about this complacency that exists in Spain with things that have always been that way. You probably hear this a lot. This has always been done that way. This is what is done wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. Businesses cannot thrive. There's a tremendous level of legal and investor insecurity. This is a country that should be attracting capital like there's no tomorrow and still sees foreign direct investment at falling 22% in 2023. A lot of things have to do with lifting regulatory burdens, lifting a lot of taxation burdens that make it very difficult to hire. No, it's very expensive to hire. Many people here say that salaries are very low, but they don't look at what the cost is for the employer. So all of those things make me, on the one side, hopeful that there is a solution, but very frustrated about the level of complacency.
Did the complacency get worse under Sanchez, or has it come through since the Rajoy government?
No, I think that we've had a problem of complacency about the state of the Spanish economy since the burst of the real estate bubble. Interestingly enough, when Spain was growing a lot in the middle of the real estate bubble and everything was phenomenal, there was quite a level of criticism, healthy criticism, and open debate about this. For some strange reason, the Zapatero government with PSOE in the middle of the financial crisis decided to use a lot of propaganda, green shoots, we are in the Champions League of the economy, all those, a lot of ludicrous propaganda that I understand, obviously, that a government is going to try to sell the economic data in the best possible way. One thing is to sell economic data in the best possible way. Another completely different thing is to use propaganda that tries to sell that you are the best out there. Now, the best thing after the invention of sliced bread or something like that. It's ludicrous, and it reminds me of the Franco regime. When I was a kid, I'm 56, I'm going to be 57 years old this year. When I was a kid, in Spain, the Franco regime tended to use a lot of propaganda saying, the evil British and the evil Americans, everybody was evil and we were the best. And things in Spain were amazing. Obviously not. No, for anybody that travels. Interestingly enough, it's been the Socialist Party of 2008 to 2010 and the Socialist Party of 2019, 2024, the ones that have taken the complacency to new extremes. In the Rajoy government, there was an active interest in trying to say that we were getting out the hole. But one thing is saying we're getting out of the hole and things are better and all of that. And another completely different thing is to say we have record employment. The economy is going like a rocket, I heard the other day. No, it's ridiculous. But complacency, yes, there is in general one of the big flaws of governments in Spain. Instead of being, I'm not going to say critical, but instead of being realistic about the shape of the Spanish economy, especially compared with our neighbors, with the thriving Baltic countries, etc., you just basically fiddle about with data to say that everything is going well, and it's not, obviously.
It's very surprising across many countries that, of course, government in power can have objectively bad policies and many people still support the government. But I'm curious if there has been an increase in tension with the population against the government, national government here in Spain. Because for me, being in Madrid is a bit difficult to tell sometimes what Madrid is like versus what Spain is like in terms of politics. So has there been an intensification of anti-government sentiment on the national level here in Spain?
Absolutely. The level of fragmentation in Spain, polarization, is unseen. I have always had socialist friends, conservative friends, even people from the extreme left, no problem. And you just laughed about it. This is a very open country now. You laughed about it, went on, you're always with this. Didn't matter. We have reached a point in which the level of fragmentation is so enormous that the government is constantly trying to make everybody else an enemy. It's not asking people to be with them. It's asking to be with them or against them. You may not be. The concept that every single policy that the Sanchez government implements is perfect is all the time in the media. Everything. Even if he says one thing and changes the opinion, like with the amnesty law, completely 180-degree change, and it was great before and it's great now. I cannot understand the lack of internal criticism. It's the political parties, I would say in particular the PSOE. It's like PSOE has become a sect. Doesn't make any sense. In PSOE, there were called families, different groups within the party that had different ideological views. There was internal debate, there was criticism, but it's become a very personalistic party since Zapatero, by the way. This was done by Zapatero in 2004, not in 2004 to 2008. There's a point that almost coincides with the financial crisis, in which the internal debate is basically just erased from the Socialist Party, which was a very, I would say, hodgepodge of very different opinions being presented all the time. Internal debate was not just accepted, but encouraged when Felipe González was in power. The Socialist Party of the 80s has absolutely nothing to do with the Socialist Party of 2019, 2023. And it's basically because the influence of the Sao Paulo Forum and the Puebla Group is very large. Is very large. And those are groups that are basically built to whitewash and defend the Cuban and Venezuelan dictatorships. Interestingly enough, the Socialist Party, which was a very interesting party with a lot of different families, with different debates, has become literally almost a carbon copy of the Socialist Party of Venezuela. That is a personalistic thing that basically whatever the leader says goes.
I would hear that, and many people that listen will hear that and say, that kind of sounds a bit extreme. It's still Europe, Western Europe. How could it be that a party in Western Europe could get to that point so quickly?
Oh, how? Because it's incredibly powerful for the leader. And by the way, you may say that it sounds radical, but it's not a coincidence. It is happening all over. It is not a coincidence that in Colombia, in Chile, which is a very developed nation, in other nations, you have the influence of the Puebla Group creating this very extreme parties out of what were initially parties that had a sort of social democrat open and an avid debate. But it's happening in Spain. It happened in Greece. And it's very typical of the debate to hear, oh, but that is going too far. That is not going to happen here. Guess what? That's what they said in Venezuela. Guess what? That's what they said in Argentina. Guess what? That's what they said in Chile. And guess what? That's what they said in Greece as well. Everybody, the only way in which radical ideologies get to power is by the inaction of the people that could stop it. Inaction within the Socialist Party, inaction within the Spanish society.
A comment I hear a lot is, on a national level, the current PP leader, Feijóo, isn't charismatic enough to carry a well-worn victory for PP in a general election. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's very typical of Spain to say that. I heard the same thing about Rajoy, and Rajoy won with an absolute majority. I heard the same thing about Aznar, and Aznar won with an absolute majority. Furthermore, you live in Madrid. I heard it over and over again about Ayuso, and Ayuso won with an absolute majority. There's always a media construct being generated about the profiles of leaders that suddenly changes. And probably the leader has done nothing different. It's how it's portrayed. I heard when Biden was one of the candidates to be the Democratic candidate, I heard that he wasn't able to win an election, that he didn't have an agenda, that he didn't have policies, blah, 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 blah. It's very typical. And it's particularly typical of the assessment of the media of the leader of the opposition. That the media said exactly the same about Pedro Sánchez. Isn't it interesting? Pedro Sánchez is like, he doesn't have a personality. He's very obscure with no discernible ideology, not real leadership, blah, 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 blah. And look at him.
Is migration or immigration a particularly large economic issue in Spain? Like, it's coming to be a big topic across Europe now, especially in the UK, of course.
Not as big as in other countries in Europe. Not as big because in Spain, we have seen the positives of migration. We have seen a very large number of people coming from South America and from the north of Africa that come here, that work, that are integrated in the community. It's a completely different thing than what other countries have seen. I'm not saying that there is not an issue in some communities or in some regions, what I would say destructive migration, people that come with no desire to integrate themselves, with no desire to work but to live out of subsidies. There may be, and I'm not saying that it is not there, but it is not the norm. And that's why there is such low level of xenophobic viewpoints within the Spanish regions, because you have seen a lot of people coming from north of Africa, from different countries that have come here, and that they actually want to work. They want to contribute. They want to integrate themselves. They want to bring their culture, but also accept our culture. We have had episodes, but not large bouts of problems the way that other countries have.
Final question. I am a tourist coming to Spain for the first time for 1 week. I do not want to go to Ibiza. I want to do something more cultural, something more in-depth. What do I do?
Oh my God. How many days do you have?
1 week.
1 week. Okay. You have a fantastic railway system, and therefore you would need to go to visit Madrid, visit Sevilla, visit Valencia, visit Barcelona, visit Bilbao, and that is going to take you a few days. And you definitely need to also visit Extremadura 1 day, rent a car because the railway system is not that great to get there, and visit Galicia. So the great thing about is that you can come to Madrid, set it as the starting point, and then go to all of those regions within a week. And that, for example, the girlfriend of one of my kids has done that and seen 7 regions in 7 days, and going to see everything, but you get the diversity of the culture, which is phenomenal. It's so different. The north is so different from the west and the west from the south, no?
Perfect. So, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been a very insightful conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure.
That's it for this episode. For updates about the podcast, please subscribe to our Substack blog found on cpsi.media. You can also read our newsletters and long-form content on Caribbean policy improvements.